This is a story I haven't thought about in a long time, and for good reason. My friends and I back in our younger days were always looking for new places to explore. Growing up in New Jersey, there was no shortage of abandoned buildings to keep us entertained. Old warehouses, forgotten factories, and plenty of decaying structures, all perfect for a night of urban exploration. In hindsight, most of the things we did weren't all that thrilling, just kind of eerie, but every now and then we stumbled upon something that stood out. It felt like we were living on the edge, discovering new worlds hidden in plain sight. The rush of exploring places that hadn't been touched in years was something that drew us in. No matter the risk, even the quiet, unsettling silence of these forgotten places was enough to keep us coming back. We didn't know it then, but those nights would shape our lives in ways we hadn't imagined. One of those places was an abandoned middle school, about a 30-minute drive from where we lived. We'd been hearing about it for a while and seen some photos online, so we figured it was finally time to check it out. Late summer, the usual activities were starting to get boring. Basketball in my backyard, aimless drives with the windows down. I don't even remember who came up with the idea, but it felt spontaneous and fun. There was something about the idea of venturing into the unknown that made everything else seem dull. We talked about it for days, hyping each other up, wondering what we'd find in. It was the perfect excuse to break away from our routine and do something memorable. The summer heat was still clinging to the air, making it feel like the perfect night for an adventure. Everyone was in on it, excited to see this place we'd only heard about and imagined. There were 4 of us that night: me, Yuri, Frank, and Freddie. Frank and I were into graffiti, so we brought some black and white spray paint with us. My bag had a couple of leftover Roman candles from the 4th of July too. Nothing too wild, but just enough to add to the fun. Our usual routine was simple. We'd mess around inside, climb up to the roof, shoot off some fireworks, and then make a quick getaway before any cops showed up. The thrill was in the unpredictability, finding new corners of these abandoned places that felt like our own personal secret. It was less about causing trouble and more about getting a rush from doing something off the beaten path. The thrill of tagging the walls, adding our marks to the forgotten space, was like claiming territory in a world that had moved on. Even in the most desolate places, we found a way to make our own mark, literally and figuratively. Yuri was driving and we made our way through the back streets near the school. To our surprise, the fence surrounding the property had been cut open. We didn't have to jump it. The school itself was huge, way bigger than the pictures suggested. It would take us hours to explore the whole place, but that was a good thing. We had time to kill. Frank went first through the hole, then Yuri, then me, and Freddie brought up the rear. Freddie was always the fearless one. As we stepped onto the grounds, the feeling of trespassing hit us all at once, but it only fueled the excitement. We couldn't help but feel like we were getting away with something. The building loomed ahead, dark and imposing under the night sky. There was something almost magical about entering an old, abandoned school, like we were stepping into a forgotten chapter of history. It felt like the place had a story to tell, if only we were bold enough to listen. Once inside, we found an unlocked door and stepped into the building. Even with flashlights, it was haunting. Imagine walking through the hallways of your childhood school, but everything is silent. No kids, no teachers, just empty, decaying walls, exposed wires and bits of broken furniture. The place felt frozen in time, like a ghost town. There was a strange, eerie beauty in the way time had stopped, leaving behind a shell of its former self. We joked nervously as we walked through the corridors, trying to lighten the mood, but there was always this underlying tension in the air. The air was thick with dust and decay, and you could feel the weight of years of abandonment. Every creaking floorboard and distant sound made us jump, even though we knew it was probably just the building settling. The silence was oppressive, like the walls were watching. We wandered through the halls, checking out the graffiti on the walls. Some of it was good, some of it was awful, but Frank and I took our time admiring the tags. We made a quick loop through the basement, which was the most rundown part of the school. We didn't stick around there long, partly because of the wear and tear, but also because the atmosphere started to get creepy. One room had a massive pentagram painted on the floor. It wasn't unusual for places like this, but it definitely made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The basement was cold, the air damp and musty. There were old lockers, smashed windows, and strange symbols scattered around the place. But the pentagram was the worst. Its stark lines on the floor, the remnants of a once bright red paint, made the room feel charged with something dark and unsettling. We all felt it, that prickling sensation, like we weren't alone. We didn't hang around there. We moved upstairs. On the 2nd floor, we found a classroom with a pristine white wall. Frank and I grinned at each other and started tagging it. Meanwhile, Yuri and Freddie disappeared down another hallway, probably looking for a way to the room. Once we finished our piece, Frank wanted to do more, but I was getting restless, so I wandered off to check out more of the art in the other rooms. The air felt different upstairs, less stale, but still heavy with the feeling of neglect. Each room we passed had its own personality, its own story. Some had walls covered in colorful graffiti, others had old desks and chairs left behind like they were waiting for a class to return. I half expected to hear a teacher's voice echoing through the halls, but the only sound was the shuffle of our footsteps and the occasional clink of metal. After a few minutes, I heard Frank yell out behind me. He sounded pissed. He asked if I'd messed with his bag. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. He was convinced I'd taken it. After searching the room, we couldn't find it. His bag gone. We figured Freddy must have taken it as a prank, so we decided to find Yuri and Freddy, who by then we assumed were on the roof. The search for the bag felt like a distraction, like something wasn't quite right, but we pushed the feeling aside. We were used to these little pranks, but this was different. Frank was genuinely upset, and I could tell something was off. As we moved from room to room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The silence in the halls was too thick, too deliberate. We had to find that bag, get out, and go back to the safety of the outside world. We made our way upstairs, but the stairs didn't lead to the roof. We started wandering the hallways aimlessly, checking rooms for a way up. I walked into a small side room and froze. There it was, another pentagram, freshly painted, the paint still dripping down the walls, and in the corner of the room, Frank's bag just sitting there. The sight of the bag in that room, amidst the pentagram, felt like a bad omen. It was almost as if the room itself had been waiting for us, for Frank's bag to appear there. It was too much of a coincidence. I felt a cold chill run down my spine as I reached for the bag. Frank was already on edge, his face pale, as he grabbed it and muttered under his breath. It didn't sit right with me, either. The atmosphere in that room felt charged, as if it was holding something back. We needed to leave, but the unease was spreading through us. Something had shifted. Before I could say anything, Frank grabbed the bag. "What the hell is wrong with it?" he muttered. I didn't respond. Even as a joke, it didn't sit right. Freddy was capable of pranks, but this crossed a line. We left the room, still shaken, and started walking in silence. The halls seemed darker now, less inviting. The air was thick with tension, and our footsteps echoed in the emptiness, each sound amplified in the stillness. We didn't speak much as we moved through the building, each of us lost in our thoughts, trying to make sense of the events that had unfolded. It felt like the school was closing in around us, like we were no longer welcome in its hollowed halls. The creeping sense of dread that had begun to settle over us intensified with every step. Then we heard footsteps, fast, heavy ones coming toward. Freddy and Yuri motioned for us to follow them. We didn't ask questions. We just ran. The noise of the footsteps behind us pushed us into overdrive. There was no hesitation, no looking back. It was like our instincts kicked in, and all we could think about was getting the hell out of. As we sprinted, I could hear the pounding of my heart in my ears, drowning out the sound of everything else. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made me feel like we could outrun anything. But I knew deep down that something wasn't right. We had no idea what was chasing us, but the sound of those footsteps told us it was dangerous. We didn't dare stop to find out. Here's a good rule to live by. If someone tells you to run, don't hesitate, just run. As we ran, Yuri tried to explain, but I couldn't make sense of it over the noise. All I gathered was that we were running from someone, or someone's. It wasn't long before we found ourselves in a different part of the building, trying to catch our breath. We figured if we found a stairwell, we'd eventually make it out. But the place was a maze, its hallways twisting and turning, and each doorway seemed to lead to another darkened room. It was like the building was playing tricks on us, trapping us in its endless corridors. Our thoughts were scattered, and we could barely keep track of who was. All I could focus on was putting one foot in front of the other, praying we'd find our way out before it was too late. Then we heard it, a sharp, hissing noise, like someone trying to imitate a cat. We froze, hoping whoever was down there wouldn't notice. But then we heard a deep voice, a voice that sent chills down my spine. "I should have cut you when I had the chance." My heart stopped, and the blood drained from my face. The voice was cold, calculating and full of malice. I could almost feel the weight of those words pressing down on me. I wanted to scream, to ask who the hell they were, but the terror lodged in my throat, leaving me unable to speak. The sound of their footsteps grew louder as they got closer, and all I could think about was getting out. We didn't stop running. We could. Every part of me screamed that we needed to get away, but no matter how fast we ran, it felt like they were right behind us. Without thinking, we bolted again, and this time we could hear multiple sets of footsteps behind us. The voices were yelling obscenities, threats, things that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the scariest moment of my life. The chase felt endless, like we were running through a nightmare with no escape. Every corner we turned seemed to bring us closer to the danger, and the walls of the school seemed to close in tighter with each passing second. My chest burned with the effort of running, but I couldn't slow down. We had to get out, there was no other option. The feeling of being hunted, of having something out there that wanted to hurt us, was too real to ignore. We were in survival mode, doing everything we could to get away from whatever was following us. We ran until Yuri made a sharp turn, and we found ourselves at the front door we had entered. We didn't stop running until we were back at Yuri's car, speeding away from that place. The relief of finally being outside, of feeling the cool night air, was overwhelming. My legs felt like jelly, and I could barely catch my breath. We didn't talk much as we piled into the car, still processing what had just happened. It felt like a dream, a nightmare we had barely escaped, but I knew deep down that we hadn't just imagined it. Something was wrong in that school, something that had been waiting for us. It felt like we had narrowly escaped something far worse than just a creepy building. As we drove off, we looked back. The school was barely visible, just a dark silhouette against the night. Freddy told us his side of the story too. After they'd failed to find the roof, Freddy and Yuri heard strange sounds coming from one of the rooms. When they went to investigate, they found 3 cloaked figures sitting in a circle, hunched over something on the floor. They didn't get a good look at what it was, but Freddy said it looked like a game with marbles or stones. When they saw Freddy and Yuri, they scrambled to chase them. That's when we met up. The more we heard, the more it became clear that we weren't dealing with a simple prank. Whatever had been inside that building wasn't something we were prepared to face. Everything about it didn't add up. Why mess with us? Take Frank's bag if they really meant us harm. Freddy's theory was that they thought we'd never find our way out, and wanted to toy with us first. Yuri thought the pentagram room was where they meant to sacrifice us, but I wasn't so sure. I thought they were just trying to cut us off, get ahead of us while we wandered through the maze of hallways. It didn't make sense. The whole situation felt like a twisted game, and we were the unwitting players. Whatever had been inside that building had been watching us, manipulating the entire experience for reasons we couldn't understand. But there was one thing we all agreed on: we would never go back there. Whatever was going on inside that school, it wasn't something we wanted any part of. It wasn't just the graffiti, the pentagrams, or the creepy noises. It was the feeling that something dark had been waiting for us. We'd walked into something we couldn't explain, and it was better to leave it that way. Some places are better left untouched, left to fade away in the dark corners of your memory. And that school, whatever its story was, would never be something we could forget. That building still stands to this day, but as far as I know, it's still abandoned, and I'm glad it's far behind us.